Rain came down in steady threads as the black SUV rolled past the crooked wooden sign that read Camp Wakefield. The letters were chipped, faded, and a little too whimsical for Nathaniel Locke's taste. He sat rigid in the driver's seat, one hand loose on the wheel, the other resting against the edge of his thigh where his son's backpack sat upright like a silent passenger. A week. That's what his assistant had booked. 1 week at a camp his ex-wife used to rave about. She said it would be good for Oliver. Let him breathe for once, she had texted, as if the boy didn't breathe in the penthouse, as if Nathaniel didn't give him everything. Nathaniel pulled to a stop near the drop-off circle, the gravel crunching under the tires. The moment he cut the engine, silence rushed in, thick and rural and intrusive. He wasn't used to it. The city hummed even in stillness like a second heartbeat. Here the trees only creaked in the wind, and Oliver, small and stone-faced in the passenger seat, didn't move. "You'll be fine," Nathaniel said, not entirely to convince his son. "They have a whole team of staff, counselors, activities, nature walks. You liked that brochure, remember?" Oliver shrugged. He hadn't looked at it once. Nathaniel ran a hand down his face. He was already thinking about the calls waiting for him back at the lodge, because yes, he'd rented the nearest one with Wi-Fi and reliable cell service. Just because his assistant had wrangled him into this didn't mean he was about to trade company acquisitions for canoe races. The passenger door opened before he could say anything else. Oliver stepped out, skinny legs in cargo shorts, raincoat too big for his frame. 9 years old and already worn thin by court dates and weekend handoffs. Nathaniel watched him go, the ache in his chest not new but louder here, far from concrete and glass. And then she appeared. She wasn't what he expected from a camp nurse. No matronly scrubs, no sterile clipboard, just a woman in denim and rain boots, a hood pulled halfway over her head, strands of chestnut hair clinging to her cheek. She was talking to another child and kneeling beside them with the kind of ease that made Nathaniel pause, not performative, not coaxing, just present. Her hand rested on the child's shoulder in a way that was firm but kind, steady. When she looked up, it was directly at him. And then she stood. "Hi there," she said, walking over without flinching from the rain. "You must be Oliver's dad." Her voice was warm but not sugary. Her eyes held something he couldn't place, a kind of knowing, not judgment, not awe, just recognition, like she saw him in a way others didn't bother to. "I am," Nathaniel said, straightening. He hadn't realized how tall he still stood until he noticed she barely reached his chin. "And you are?" "Marley," she said, "camp nurse. I patch up scraped knees and rescue the occasional homesick camper." He nodded. "Right, well, I'll be nearby if there's anything. You have my number, I assume." She tilted her head slightly. "Actually, I don't. The forms were missing some info. I tried calling, but—" "My assistant probably missed that," he interrupted. "I'll fix it." A long pause stretched between them. Rain trickled off the roofline of the welcome cabin nearby. Marley didn't blink. "You can go," she said gently. "He'll be okay. Kids usually are once they get mud on their shoes and s'mores in their teeth." Nathaniel hesitated. His fingers curled around the strap of the backpack still in the passenger seat. Marley took a small step closer. "Mr. Locke," she said, "he doesn't need you to stay. He just needs to know you're not disappearing." That struck something, he wasn't sure what, but it lodged itself somewhere behind his ribs. He handed her the backpack. "His allergy meds are inside, label on the bottle." She nodded. "I'll make sure it's all noted. And if anything happens, I'll call, I promise." He studied her face a moment longer, unsure why he didn't want to leave just yet. Then Oliver waved, barely more than a twitch of fingers, and Nathaniel nodded back. By the time he reached the lodge, the rain had stopped. But the echo of Marley's voice stayed with him, longer than he expected. Not the words exactly, just the way she'd said go, like it wasn't abandonment, like it could be trust. The next morning, Nathaniel was back at his laptop by 6, the sun barely grazing the tips of the pines. The Wi-Fi was weak, which infuriated him more than it should have. He stared at spreadsheets and proposals with all the concentration of a man used to winning, but it all felt distant, like someone else's life he'd borrowed. By noon, he couldn't take it anymore. He drove back to the camp. He told himself it was to drop off a different rain jacket Oliver had forgotten, but he knew. He found Marley near the infirmary cabin, kneeling again, this time inspecting a camper's bug bite with the same calm focus he'd seen yesterday. When she glanced up and saw him, she didn't roll her eyes or frown, but she didn't smile either. "You're back," she said, standing. "I had something for Oliver. He's at the lake with his group, kayaking." Nathaniel looked toward the woods, unsure whether he was allowed to follow. Marley raised a brow. "You can't shadow him," she said lightly. "This isn't private school pickup." He smirked despite himself. "I'm aware." She leaned back against the porch railing. "You're not used to this, are you?" "This?" The stillness, the letting go. He didn't answer. She didn't seem to expect him to. "I worked pediatric ER before this," she said after a moment. "Gloves, charts, panic. I used to love the rush, but it wears you down, especially when you have to tell too many parents that things don't always turn out." Her voice dipped, not sad exactly, just real. "I like this better," she added. "Kids fall down here too, but they usually get back up." Nathaniel looked at her hands, strong, clean, no gloves now. "You left something behind to come here," he said. "So did you." He didn't reply. Marley pushed off the railing. "Want some coffee?" He followed her into the cabin before he could think twice. They talked about Oliver, about scraped knees and peanut allergies and the day-to-day rhythms of a place like this. Nathaniel didn't mention mergers or quarterly goals. Marley didn't ask. She poured him a cup without asking how he took it, and it was terrible, burnt and weak, but he drank it. "You don't have to check in every day," she said, handing him a chipped mug. "He's doing okay, better than okay, actually." Nathaniel looked down into the swirling surface of the coffee. "He doesn't talk much anymore, not like he used to. Kids don't always talk with words." He glanced at her. "Watch how he looks at the water," she said, "or how he walks slower when someone's behind him, making space. That's speaking too." Nathaniel stared at her again, not at her face, but at her posture, at the way she stood like someone who knew how to be needed without asking for anything in return. He didn't know the last time someone had spoken to him like this. She saw him noticing. And then she smiled, not big, not coaxing, just real. "Stick around if you want," she said. "We're doing a bonfire tonight. Even CEOs need to warm their hands sometimes." That night he came back. Oliver didn't look surprised to see him. Marley handed him a marshmallow stick. And for the first time in months, Nathaniel Locke didn't check his phone once. The bonfire crackled like a living thing, sending embers twisting into the night sky. Nathaniel stood at the edge of the circle, half listening to a counselor play guitar, half watching Oliver seated between two other boys, faces lit by fire and sugar. His son was laughing quietly but unmistakably. A sound that felt both foreign and familiar, like hearing an old song in a different key. Nathaniel held the marshmallow stick awkwardly. It had long since gone untouched. He hadn't come for snacks. He turned slightly when Marley approached, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear with fingers stained faintly green from some first-aid dye. "You didn't stay in your car," she said. "I didn't want to miss this." He expected her to tease him again, but she only nodded, then stood beside him in silence, letting the guitar fill the space between them. Kids passed in front of them with juice boxes and chocolate-smeared hands. Staff called out light-hearted reminders about lights out. Somewhere deep in the woods, an owl called. "You came back to watch him," Marley said eventually, "but I think you stayed because you needed to feel human again." He didn't answer, not because it wasn't true, but because he hadn't realized it until she said it. When she turned toward the firelight, he caught the faint sheen of sweat at her temple, the crease where her brow pinched in thought. She looked tired but grounded, solid in a way he envied. "Tell me something," she said, shifting her weight to one foot. "What's the last thing you did that had nothing to do with your son or your company?" He blinked at her. "I'm serious." He stopped. "I don't know." "That's the problem." Her tone wasn't biting. It was almost gentle, like she was pointing something out on his face he hadn't seen in the mirror. She tilted her head toward the path behind them. "Walk with me." He hesitated, then nodded, following her past the cabins, the laughter, the familiar glow of the fire until they reached a clearing where the air felt cooler, the night softer. The path curved gently along the edge of a small pond, still and quiet except for the ripples where frogs skipped along the surface. "This place gets to you," Marley said. "You think it's the quiet, but it's actually the space. Space to feel everything you've been ignoring." Nathaniel shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. "I don't ignore anything, I just compartmentalize." She gave a short laugh. "Same thing." They stopped near a bench carved from a fallen tree. Marley sat first. Nathaniel sat beside her, careful not to brush her arm. "How long were you in the ER?" he asked. 7 years. "And you left just like that?" "Not just like that," she said. "It took a burnout, a few panic attacks, and one long night where I had to call time on a little girl whose parents weren't there. I came here 2 months later." She looked out at the pond, expression unreadable. "There's grief that doesn't come with funerals," she added. "The kind where you lose pieces of yourself slowly, and no one brings flowers for that." Nathaniel stared at the water, suddenly unsure how to sit. Her words sank under his skin like stones. "I think I forgot how to do anything slowly," he said. "That's because you don't let anyone get close enough to notice." He looked at her then, really looked. She was still wearing that same jacket from earlier, a zipper slightly rusted, a smear of dirt near the hem, not polished, not curated, not trying to be impressive. And for the first time in longer than he could admit, Nathaniel didn't feel the need to control the conversation. "I don't like being touched," he said, "not anymore." "I noticed." He waited for the question, she didn't ask it. "It started during the divorce," he offered anyway. "Lawyers, mediators, people sitting across from me pretending they knew what was best for my son. Everything became transactional, even hugs." Marley nodded slowly. "That happens. People think they're helping when they really just want to feel right. And now I barely remember what comfort feels like unless I'm giving it to him." Her eyes met his, steady. "You can't pour into someone from a cracked glass." It was a phrase he'd heard in self-help podcasts and company wellness emails, but when she said it, it didn't sound clinical. It sounded like experience. Then gently, she reached out and touched his arm. No gloves, no clipboard, just skin to fabric and the weight of presence. Nathaniel didn't flinch. His breath hitched once in his chest but didn't break. He didn't pull away, and she didn't press further. She just sat with him in that quiet, letting the gesture speak. The moment passed. She pulled back, glancing at her watch. "You should probably head back. The kids will be wired for another hour, and then it'll go silent like someone flipped a switch." He rose with her. "Do you walk this path often?" "Every night," she said. "Sometimes with kids who need to cry where no one can hear, sometimes alone." "Mind if I join you again?" She studied him, not suspicious, just thoughtful. "If you come back," she said, "don't bring a rain jacket, you won't need it." He left before he could say something clumsy. The truth was, he didn't know what he needed anymore, but Marley wasn't offering him a fix. She was offering something quieter, a chance to unlearn the noise. The next few days unfolded with a strange rhythm. Nathaniel still answered work calls, but they became fewer. Emails remained flagged unread. His phone rang, and he let it. He started showing up to camp earlier, pretending to drop something off, but eventually stopping the act altogether. The staff got used to seeing him. The kids whispered about the man with the serious eyebrows who never smiled unless he saw Oliver. Marley never treated him like a guest or a threat. She handed him walkie-talkies when needed, had him help stack water bottles, once even tossed him a first aid kit and said, "Make yourself useful." He did. They spent time together in slivers, moments stolen between activities, passing each other at the mess hall, the occasional walk after lights out. She never talked about his job. He never asked about her past. But there were gestures, quiet things. She'd hand him coffee without speaking, and he'd remember to bring an extra jacket when the night turned cold. He'd fix the squeaky hinge on the infirmary door. She'd leave a note for Oliver with a drawing of a frog that said, "Today's a good day to be brave." He kept the note. One afternoon, a camper tripped during a trail hike and split open their palm on a jagged rock. Marley wasn't nearby, and one of the counselors panicked, holding their shirt against the bleeding hand while shouting into the walkie. Nathaniel heard the call and ran. He found the boy sobbing, crouched beside a stunned counselor. Without thinking, Nathaniel dropped to his knees and took the kid's hand in his. "You're okay," he said, voice steady in a way he hadn't used since Oliver was a toddler with night terrors. "Look at me, you're safe." The blood was thick and warm, he held it anyway. Marley arrived moments later and knelt beside him. Her eyes met his, brief, unreadable, and she took over with practiced calm. Later, after the boy had been stitched and bandaged and reassured by a phone call home, Nathaniel washed his hands in the outdoor sink behind the infirmary. He felt her behind him before she spoke. "You held his hand," she said softly. "I didn't think," he replied. "I just did it." She nodded. "That's how it starts." He turned the faucet off, water dripping from his wrists. "I still don't like being touched," he said. "But for some reason, when I'm near you, it doesn't feel like something I need to defend myself from." Marley didn't move, but something in her face softened. "I don't need to be needed," she said. "Not by anyone, not anymore." "I don't know what I need," he said, "but I think I want to find out." She looked at him for a long time. And then, with no audience, no chaos, and no urgency, she reached out and laced her fingers through his, lightly, like she was asking a question without speaking. He didn't pull away. The sun was beginning to set, casting gold across the trees. And for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel didn't feel like he was late for something. He felt exactly on time. The mornings began to change after that. Nathaniel started waking before his alarm, not to check emails or review numbers, but to watch the early fog shift over the trees. His phone stayed face down more often. His thoughts still raced, but now they had somewhere to go. He found himself cataloging things he never used to notice: how Oliver leaned toward the lake like it was listening, how Marley hummed to herself when organizing the infirmary shelves, how pine sap smelled when the sun hit it just right. They weren't dating, no one had said anything close to that. But there was an us-ness forming in the quiet, not in declarations, but in the way they started knowing where the other would be. He'd show up with clean towels before she asked. She'd leave a thermos on the lodge steps filled with something minty and warm on cold mornings. It was subtle and it was slow. And for once, slow didn't feel like wasting time. One afternoon, while Oliver was off-site for a short hike with his group, Nathaniel lingered at the camp. The place was half empty, the kind of lull that made the forest feel wider. Marley was restocking gauze and antiseptic in the back room when he stepped into the infirmary. She glanced over her shoulder. "Did you burn yourself again?" she asked, teasing. "Because if so, we really need to talk about your marshmallow technique." "I'm intact, thanks," he said, resting a hand on the doorway. "I just didn't feel like being anywhere else." She paused, box in hand. Then she motioned to the chair near the supply shelf. "Zit." He did. She sat across from him on a low stool, the first aid kit forgotten between them. There were fluorescent lights above, casting the room in pale blue, but her eyes were warmer than anything overhead. "I got a call today," she said. He watched her. "From a hospital back east, an old colleague. They're starting a pediatric palliative wing and asked if I'd consider being part of the team." Nathaniel's chest tightened. He didn't speak right away. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he wasn't sure it was his place to say anything. "Do you want to go?" he asked finally. She shrugged. "I don't know. Part of me misses that world, but part of me," she trailed off. "It's not just about what I want anymore." His breath caught just briefly. "Is it because of me?" "No," she said. "It's because of me, but you're part of it." Nathaniel looked down at his hands, the same ones that had once signed deals worth millions. Now he watched them tremble slightly, vulnerable in a way he couldn't hide. "I'm not good at this," he admitted. "I've spent so long being in control, making sure everything's efficient, safe. Even love became something I managed from a distance." Marley didn't flinch. "You don't have to be good at it, you just have to be real." He looked up. She was already moving, standing, closing the space between them with a softness that didn't ask for permission, but offered it all the same. She placed her hand on his cheek, not possessive, not claiming, just there. "You feel everything more than you let on," she said. "You've just been taught to carry it alone." He swallowed, nodding once. Then gently, her forehead rested against his. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But everything in him settled at the idea that he could, one day, and that when it happened, it wouldn't be to fill a silence. It would be because they'd made something sacred in the space between their wounds. Later that evening, Oliver returned from the hike with a small, hand-carved necklace made from a wood chip and fishing wire. He held it out to Nathaniel. "For you." Nathaniel blinked. "You made this." Oliver nodded, looking shy for the first time in days. "The counselor said we could make one for someone who waited for us." Nathaniel didn't trust his voice. He took the necklace in both hands and tied it around his neck like it was gold. Marley stood a few feet away, arms crossed loosely, watching, not intruding. He caught her eye and smiled, a real one. And she smiled back. The days blurred after that, each one softer than the last. Nathaniel started helping Marley with basic checkups. She showed him how to fold pressure bandages and let him apply ointment on scraped elbows. The proximity no longer startled him. If anything, it steadied him. One afternoon, rain drove the kids inside. The rec hall turned chaotic, filled with coloring books, story circles, and noise. Nathaniel stayed late to help clean up. He found Marley alone in the infirmary, bent over a set of camper forms. "You missed dinner," he said, holding up a paper plate covered in tin foil. She turned, eyes tired but bright. "You brought me food. I'm not entirely useless." She took the plate and sat down, cross-legged on the floor, waving him over. He sat beside her, the hardwood warm from the heat in the walls. They ate in silence for a while, just the rustle of wind outside and the occasional thump of a loose shutter. After a few bites, she spoke. "Tell me something no one knows." He didn't answer right away. Then, "I was supposed to be a writer." Marley stopped chewing. "Really? I had a scholarship for it, creative writing. I got one story published in a lit magazine. My mom cried." "So what happened?" "My dad got sick and the bills came fast. I took a job at a firm, told myself I'd write on weekends. Then the promotions started, the bonuses, the lifestyle. Suddenly I was 30 and the only thing I wrote were memos." She looked at him differently then. Not in pity, but in recognition. "Do you still have the story?" "Somewhere. I haven't read it in years." "You should." They didn't kiss that night either. But when she fell asleep on his shoulder, he didn't move for a long time. He just listened to the rhythm of her breathing and let himself feel how close he was to something he thought he'd lost. Something like home. On the last day of camp, the sky opened up again. Parents arrived with umbrellas and hugs, car doors swinging wide, voices bouncing across the gravel. Nathaniel stood beside Marley under the infirmary awning, watching Oliver shake hands with his counselor like a grown man. He wasn't the same boy who'd arrived with downcast eyes and tight shoulders. "I don't want to leave," Oliver said as he climbed into the SUV. "Can we come back next year?" Nathaniel glanced at Marley, heart twisting. "We'll see," he said. She smiled. "You always say that when the answer's yes." He didn't argue. She stepped back as he closed the door, her hand brushing his wrist. It was the lightest goodbye, but it didn't feel unfinished. As he pulled away, the camp shrinking in his rearview mirror, he didn't feel like something was ending. He felt like something real had just begun. Back in the city, the tempo returned before he even reached the penthouse. A missed call from his COO, a flagged email chain about a client loss, 3 back-to-back meetings on Monday. The office was the same, sterile, polished, humming with efficiency. But it didn't fit him the way it used to. The sleeves of his suit felt tighter. The silence in his apartment more hollow. He caught himself standing by the window more than usual, not to admire the skyline, but because it was the only place where the city couldn't touch him. Oliver adjusted faster. He fell into old patterns with the ease of a child used to shifting between worlds, but even then there were differences. He kept the frog drawing on his nightstand. He asked for peanut butter and apple slices at breakfast. He started whistling. Nathaniel didn't know how to explain the ache that came from those tiny details. Like finding breadcrumbs from a life he hadn't realized he wanted. He didn't call Marley. He thought about it every morning, every night, but he didn't, not right away. He told himself it was about space, letting the memory breathe, letting her make her decision about the job offer. But deep down, he was afraid. Afraid that whatever they'd shared had belonged to that place, to the pine-filtered air and firelit silences. And now they were back in the world where things broke and stayed broken. A week passed. Then, too. One evening, as Oliver built a Lego fortress on the floor, Nathaniel sat on the couch, scrolling through documents with one hand, cradling a cup of coffee with the other. The TV was on mute. The apartment lights buzzed faintly. "Dad," Oliver said, not looking up. "Yeah. Are you sad again?" Nathaniel paused. "What do you mean?" "You used to be like this before camp. You look like you're wearing your work face." He set the coffee down slowly. "Do you think I was different at camp?" Oliver nodded. "You smiled more, and you listened with your eyes." Nathaniel sat still for a long time. Then he stood, grabbed his coat, and told Oliver he'd be right back. He didn't drive. He walked 2 miles through the city, not caring that it had just rained, that the pavement glistened, that the traffic roared around him like an impatient river. He reached the bookstore she had mentioned once. The Dust Jacket, an old corner shop with more windows than walls and the smell of paper thick in the air. He didn't know why he came there, only that she'd said it was where she went when she didn't want to be seen but didn't want to be alone. She wasn't there. He stayed anyway. Picked up a used novel with a cracked spine, bought it, and walked back through the city with it tucked under his arm like a promise. The next morning, Marley called. Her voice was like it always was, warm, measured, but this time there was something beneath it, a kind of breathlessness, like she hadn't been sure he'd answer. "I didn't take the job," she said. Nathaniel closed his eyes, not in relief, not in victory, just in something softer, something like gratitude. "Why?" "Because I realized something," she said. "The version of myself that worked in hospitals, she's not who I want to be anymore." He waited. "I want stillness," she said. "I want enough space to notice things. I want people in my life who let me be quiet without assuming I'm empty." He heard himself inhale. "And I want to see where this goes," she added. Nathaniel didn't rush to speak. When he finally did, his voice was rougher than he expected. "Come over. I thought you'd never ask." She arrived just after dinner. No makeup, ponytail loose. A windbreaker zipped halfway, city dust on her boots. She didn't bring a bag. Oliver opened the door before Nathaniel could, grinning so wide it looked like it hurt. "You came," he said, stepping aside. Marley smiled, crouching down to his level. "I missed you, buddy." He leaned into her before she could say more, a hug quick and full of that wild affection kids never question. She held him like she'd done it 100 times. Nathaniel stood frozen in the doorway, watching the two people who'd opened him without permission. When she looked up, her eyes met his. "Hey," she said. "Hey." She stepped in. They didn't need to talk right away. She helped Oliver with his Lego roof. She listened to his story about the Dragon Tower and the secret room. She laughed when he did, and when he grew tired and curled on the couch, she tucked a throw over his knees like she belonged there. When he finally fell asleep, Nathaniel poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. They sat at the kitchen table like adults who had no reason to rush. "I bought a book yesterday," he said, "from that place you like." She smiled. "Did you read it?" "Not yet. I kept hoping you'd come read it with me." Her eyes softened. "I can do that." They sat in silence for a few moments. "I was scared," he admitted, "that what happened at camp wouldn't survive out here." "So was I," she said, but healing doesn't vanish, it just changes form. He nodded. Then finally, he reached for her hand. This time, she didn't need to offer it first. She laced their fingers together under the kitchen light, and it felt like the most ordinary, extraordinary thing he'd done all week. The next morning, he made pancakes, burned the first batch. Marley stood at the stove while he tried again, grinning at the disaster. Oliver sleepily climbed onto the stool beside her and said, "We should do this every Saturday." Nathaniel flipped the next pancake perfectly. He didn't say yes, he didn't say maybe. He just said, "Let's start with this one." And Marley reached for a plate like she already lived there. The first real argument happened in late October. Not loud, not cruel, just sharp around the edges, like the sudden drop in temperature that made the leaves fall in clumps. Nathaniel had come home late, his tie still on, his shoulders tense. Marley was in the kitchen, barefoot, hair damp from a shower. Oliver had already gone to bed, but his school project, a volcano made of clay and foil, sat half-finished on the dining table. "You forgot to pick up the baking soda," she said without turning. Nathaniel tossed his keys into the bowl near the door, rubbing the back of his neck. "I had back-to-back calls, it slipped my mind." Marley turned then, calm but steady. "You said you'd be there, it's not about the baking soda." He knew what she meant, and he hated how familiar the conversation felt, like something borrowed from his past, something fraying at the edges. "I didn't do it on purpose." "I never said you did." "But you're acting like." "I'm asking for presence," she said, cutting gently across his rising tone. "Not perfection, just presence." He didn't speak for a long time. She waited. When he finally moved toward the counter, he didn't apologize with flowers or an excuse. He opened the cabinet, found the cinnamon, and set it next to her tea like a peace offering. "I don't want to repeat the life I had before you," he said quietly. "Then don't," she answered. They stood there, no raised voices, no ultimatums. Just two people choosing again, harder now maybe, but still choosing. He reached for her hand. She didn't hesitate. Their days settled into something real after that. Messier, yes. Oliver had trouble with a new math teacher. Marley started offering after-school health workshops and spent long hours building lesson plans. Nathaniel scaled back his hours, not dramatically, but enough for people in the office to notice. Enough that his calendar sometimes read pickup at 3 p.m. with a bright yellow star beside it. They started hosting Friday night dinners, just the three of them, sometimes with neighbors or one of Oliver's friends. Marley cooked, Nathaniel made playlists. Oliver gave everyone assigned seats and asked deep, unexpected questions like, if you had to live on the moon, what 3 things would you bring? One night after the dishes were done and Oliver was asleep, Nathaniel found Marley curled up in the reading chair, barefoot, the novel they'd started together open in her lap. He walked over, ran a hand along the edge of her hair, then slid down to sit at her feet. "You know," she said softly, "I didn't expect any of this to last." He looked up. "I thought you'd go back to being who you were," she added, "that I'd be the soft spot you landed in for a little while." Nathaniel took her hand, kissed the palm. "I was that man," he said, "but not anymore." "You changed for Oliver." "No," he said, his voice low. "Oliver opened the door. You're the one who made me walk through it." She reached down and brushed his hair back, her touch no longer tentative, no longer asking. Then she said the words without ceremony. "I love you." He didn't pause. "I've loved you since the first night I stayed past the fire." They didn't need to make promises. Their lives had already become a series of small, intentional acts. A lunch packed with a note, a shoulder rubbed after a long day, silence offered without the need to fill it. That night they made love for the first time, not rushed or desperate but slow, like reading a story you don't want to end. He touched her without gloves, not out of bravery but because it had become natural, because by then it wasn't about fear at all. It was about trust. Winter crept in with quiet mornings and foggy windows. Marley started volunteering at the children's hospital once a week, not as a nurse, but to read stories. Nathaniel walked her there on his work-from-home days, gloved coffee cups in hand, letting the cold bite at their cheeks. They spent the holidays in a small cabin near the lake, Oliver helping build a crooked snowman that collapsed and was rebuilt 3 times before it stuck. Inside, they hung up construction paper ornaments. Marley baked something that burned but still got eaten. Nathaniel lit a fire and read aloud from that same novel. No gifts that year. Just presents. One night as Marley rested her head on his chest, Nathaniel whispered, "You brought me back to myself." She smiled into his skin. "You just needed someone to walk slow enough beside you." By the time spring came, they had built a life that didn't need explaining. One afternoon, while Marley was cleaning out the hall closet, she found a small cardboard box wedged behind an old backpack. Inside, there was a folded piece of paper, a printed story, his first one. She didn't mention it right away. She waited until after dinner, when Oliver was upstairs building a model train and the kitchen smelled like lemon and thyme. She slid it across the table. "You kept this," she said. "I used to think about publishing again," Nathaniel admitted, "but then life got louder." "Well," she said, "you still have something to say." He looked at her and then at the page. The title stared back at him like an old friend. "You think people want to read something slow, something quiet." Marley reached across the table, took his hand. "They always do," she said, "even if they don't know it yet." He read it aloud to her that night. His voice stumbled at first, then steadied. And when he looked up, her eyes were wet, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something like recognition. He leaned over the page, kissed her forehead, and said, "Maybe it's time to start again." She nodded. And so he did. The next summer, they went back to Camp Wakefield. Not just as visitors. Nathaniel became a volunteer, overseeing logistics, lending his once boardroom precision to fixing broken benches, organizing new gear, updating the infirmary inventory. He did it all quietly, without drawing lines between who he'd been and who he was now. Marley stayed on as nurse. Oliver returned as a confident 10-year-old, mentoring younger campers, now the boy who no longer looked down when he walked. There were new staff members, fresh faces, but Marley and Nathaniel had become something constant, something that kids noticed without having the words for. One evening, after a long hike and a shared sandwich by the lake, Nathaniel sat on the same bench from last summer. The one carved from a fallen tree. Marley sat beside him, their knees touching. "I used to think love had to be earned through performance," he said. "And now I know it's in the stillness." She leaned into him, eyes closed. They watched Oliver skipping rocks across the water, each one flying further than the last. And they didn't say another word. Because some endings don't need closure. They just need someone willing to stay.